So I asked all of you to vote for your 10 most loved Marvel Snap cards, and I've got the results. The 3 behind me, though, didn't actually make the cut. These are numbers 11, 12, and 13, so Black Panther just outside the top 10. But 10 cards you guys liked even more than these. Kicking it off with number 10, it's Jubilee. And yeah, apparently you guys like cheating out gigantic minions into play with Jubilee, like the Infinite, for instance. I know back in the early days, Jubilee into America Chavez was like the most common thing to do all the time. Nowadays, people are trying to get even bigger results off their Jubilee. Somebody wrote, what's in the box? Is it the Infinite or is it a rock from Subterranea? In my experience, if I'm playing Jubilee, it's always a rock. If the opponent is playing Jubilee, it's always Infinite. That's just how these things work. So there's another comment here that says Jubilee is perfect for my big deck. And listen, you got to read that one very carefully. I went through their survey. Their other comments were so wholesome and thoughtful. I don't think they meant to write this in such a, suspicious way, let's say. I'm going to take it as a straight up, honest to God, wholesome comment. And yeah, it's true. The more big cards you have in your deck, the more infinites, the more crazy 6-cost cards. Of course, Jubilee can hit some really consistent results and be very, very fun. Somebody else put it, I just enjoy the fun it brings to most decks. I don't think it's one of the best cards, but definitely the most fun for me. And yeah, I get it. Getting to play giant 6-cost things for 4 feels pretty dang nifty, and a little bit of the chaos, a little bit of the randomness is always fun too. What am I gonna get? What am I gonna get? Oh, it's awesome, and that's a really big high. So I see why people do love Jubilee for their big decks. So next up at the number 9 spot, it's Magneto. Of course, one of the most iconic villains in all of Marvel, and great card too, just utilized in so many different decks. Really great top end that can be both disruptive, but also that big power dump, 12 power, is quite competitive in its own regard sometimes. As one of you put it, great animation and strategic effect, winning flooded locations by pulling Storm, and Jessica Jones is super fun. And yeah, that's won me so many games, that exact specific scenario, but also just having any kind of pull can be a big deal. Sometimes, moving a Warpath over to ruin its effect and mess up your opponent's game plans. Just any random little 3 or 4, pulling something out of place so there's no Ant-Man effect. There's so many little crazy things you can do, these little optimizations with Magneto. And then also just having the opponent try to compete with that 12 power can be nice. So you can either use it to kind of sacrifice a lane by pulling a bunch of power into it and trying to win the other lanes, or you can just power dump that 12 and hope that's enough. Maybe, stealing 4 or 5, but still hoping to have an advantage in the Magneto lane. Somebody else put, he's just so fun to bamboozle your opponent with. It was just fun moving people's wongs and ruining their turn 6 plans, and it just makes you feel like a villain, which of course is very appropriate for Magneto. I too like the disruptive villainy of this card. Speaking of disruptiveness, here we've got Arrow at the number 8 spot, and put pretty simply by one comment, it just said, busted. And yeah, I do think Arrow is absolutely one of the strongest cards in Marvel Snap. And I think one of my prime nerf targets. If anything, we're going to get nerfed, I think Arrow has to be near the top of that list. Her effect can just outright win games, sacrificing lanes by pulling your opponent's turn 6 plays into a single location, allowing you to win the other locations. That can be amazing. She's got some disruptive potential, much like Magneto. And because of all that, this card has showed up in a ton of lists. I think the power is too high for how good this effect can be. Arrow used to be a 5/6. Wouldn't be shocked at all if Arrow returned to that stat line, and frankly I think she would still remain a pretty good card. So I know she was also on the most hated list because it can feel a little bad to have your cards just whipped around by Arrow and losing the game, but also people love that disruption. So this is one of those cards I'd like to see remain competitive and remain viable, because it's disruptive and hated as it can be, it is also very loved as well. Some cards are only one of those. People hated them a ton, but nobody really reported them as one of their favorite cards, but Arrow remains a favorite card. So if she were to be changed, hopefully she stays good. Just pull that power level down into a more reasonable state. So next up is Thanos, and as a Series 5 card, this one's a little intriguing to be on the list because, frankly, not that many players have access to Thanos yet. He's just not a card most people have because he's so hard to get, so unlikely to get in a reserve or a box, and super expensive with tokens. So, you know, limited pool of players are going to have Thanos, but still enough to show up here. And I'm not surprised at all that the people who do have Thanos absolutely love it, because I too love Thanos. I've been enjoying grinding with a Thanos deck recently myself after getting him. It's so fun trying to get all the Infinity Stones collected, and then having that monster Thanos 18 power to just dominate a lane can feel really, really good. So it's a super flavorful recreation of Thanos's you know, primary drive that most people know. Somebody here put it, being able to reenact his quest for the Infinity Stones is a really fun idea. Completely agree. Thanos is the only card at the moment that alters the deck size. It's really fun to play around with the stones and pull off the big buff on Thanos. The best part about the card is that it's really fun to both build and play the deck, which that's true. Not all cards deliver on that side of it. So doing both of those well. So yeah, I think if more people had Thanos, he'd be even higher on this list, but certainly a fitting card nonetheless for now. So moving on to the number 6 spot here, we've got Mr. Negative. And yeah, man, this card has been a favorite for so long for me. I kind of like it a little bit less as it's gotten more and more meta over the last like 6 months since early access stuff. He used to be kind of more of a hipster inclusion, and now he's pretty dang good across the board, despite, by the way, being nerfed. He used to be a 4/4. Can you imagine? Playing Mr. Negative really wasn't even much of a stat sacrifice, and then you still had some crazy upside. But of course, he's gotten better over time with cards like, you know, Silver Surfer and such, enabling some of his shenanigans. Nonetheless, I actually think the -1 stat line is such a great fit for a card like this. It feels so flavorful to have Mr. Negative have a negative stat line and really pay the penalty here for the upside of his effect by getting a very, very weak play for 4 energy. Some of you wrote really cool, unique stat line and a really unique effect. Building decks that can win with or without him, but harness his unique effect makes him incredibly fun. And I agree. I like things that have a little bit of a deck building challenge, that have to require you to think about the game in a different way than you might otherwise. It's not just a keyword like ongoing or on reveal, but now suddenly I'm thinking about stats and costs and how to flip those in some compelling ways while still retaining, you know, some semblance of a curve or a deck that kind of works even if Negative is not being played. And that makes this a very satisfying card to run and fun to play out in a game as well, because you never really know what you're going to get in those post-negative turns. It can feel a little bit chaotic as you're playing off the top of your deck very often, which makes it pretty fun, and not at all shocked to see Negative here at number 6. So next up here, moving into the top 5, it's Daredevil. And yeah, what a fun card. Getting the ability to see what your opponent is going to do feels like cheating very often, and having ways to punish those plays sometimes, like you know, perfectly placed Professor X, because you know, hey, my opponent's not playing left, I can just win left for free right now with Professor X. That can feel pretty dang dirty on occasion. Daredevil's a card that's not like crazy high play rate though, or not often featured in the best deck. Sometimes it's just better about getting as much raw power as you can down, and Daredevil doesn't always, you know, play towards that game plan all that nicely, but still a really satisfying card to play. People here wrote, silently dismantles your opponent's deck 3 turns in advance, lets my smooth brain snap on turn 5. And that's a great point. Having that informational advantage can also give you a cube advantage sometimes, allowing you to take, you know, favorable snaps that might otherwise be a little bit too risky. Those crucial turn 5 plays being face up is game winning most of the time. I really love the character, but I also think the card effect is really unique and interesting, and I couldn't agree more. This is a really nifty, unique design for Marvel Snap. So next up here at the number 4 spot, we have Galactus. Much like Thanos, a big old Series 5 villain, still making the cut here despite a card probably not everybody, or even not many people, have access to. And I totally get it. These big, awesome, iconic villains, of course, everybody loves them. They're some of the best characters in all of Marvel, and Galactus is really fun in game 2. The best animation in Marvel Snap, taking over the entire screen and such, is so cool. And the playstyle on this one's really fun too. This kind of all-in gamble on a single location feels like Galactus is really literally eating and wiping out these other planets or locations. One of you wrote, he eats everything. Another one of you just wrote the word Galactus. You wrote Galactus as your card choice, and then for a comment explaining why you like Galactus, you wrote Galactus a second time. Maybe it was a mistake, but you know what? I kind of get it. Just writing Galactus is sort of explanation enough for me. So moving into the top 3 here, we've got Hela. And yeah, this is a really fun build around that introduces a ton of chaos into Marvel Snap. I'm going to discard a bunch of crazy big things, and then Hela's going to resummon them and give me, you know, 20, 30, 40 plus power all on the final turn to surprise my opponent. And you can't really control where exactly it's going to go. You're still kind of, you know, up to the whims of RNG, but very often that's enough to just overwhelm the opponent with raw stats and steal an otherwise seemingly unwinnable game. And I think that's why Hela has been so popular. Just embracing all of that randomness can be very, very fun. Not the most consistently competitive deck. It's had its moments here and there where it's been solid, but definitely more reliable game plans, more controlled game plans tend to work better. But that's okay. As this first comment put it, the Hela discard deck is inconsistent. But the thing about Marvel Snap is that even fun decks with poor win rates can be used to climb. And that's right. I love that you can have fun without really sacrificing your competitiveness too much. Somebody else wrote, I love it when RNG goes my way. And certainly those highlight moments where Hela does something absolutely crazy can be very, very fun and memorable. So moving on to number 2, this one kind of surprised me a little bit, but perhaps very appropriate that it's at the number 2 spot, because Cerebro 2 decks are probably the most common and powerful versions of Cerebro decks, where you're trying to run a bunch of 2 power units, and then Cerebro is buffing them all to 4 power, perhaps even higher if you've got some Mystique action in there as well. And yeah, Cerebro decks are a fairly competitive deck, not the top end of the meta right now at least, but still able to climb with quite a bit. And there's a lot of different fun ways to build them because, you know, because you're just looking for power totals. Cards don't have to be thematically connected in any other way. So you can have on reveal and ongoing and whatever other mix of stuff that you want. You can even run M'Baku, which that alone might be a reason to play Cerebro, just as an excuse to play what I might consider Marvel Snap's worst card, or very nearly the worst. Maybe Angel is worse, but also runnable with Cerebro. So there you go. As this comment put it, he's a bro to all my 2 power units. That's really nice. I like this perspective as well. It introduces a deck building constraint that was quite fun to work around. So that's right, like you have to really focus on how to build your deck. And the cool thing about Cerebro is too, it doesn't just say like your 2 power cards have +2 power. So there are multiple different ways to slice this deck building problem. That's why we have Cerebro 2 power decks and Cerebro 3 power decks. And now we've even got some meme Cerebro 15 power decks popping up, which of course aren't any good, but is still a really neat idea that you can try to do this a variety of different ways. Not to mention that also introduces some in-game counterplay for this card as well, where your opponent can like try to buff your stuff and then mess up your Cerebro, etc. Locations can mess it up. So there are layers upon layers of complexity to this card, which make it a really interesting deck building challenge, but also fun in-game as well, which I think is a really nice combination. And then finally, at the number 1 spot, the most loved card in all of Marvel Snap, it's Lockjaw. And it's a pretty cool one to see at the top, I think. It probably wouldn't have been my first guess for number 1 card, but, you know, thinking about it now, it makes sense. Because Lockjaw, number 1, has a lot of competitive viability. There are a handful of pretty darn good Lockjaw decks. Number 2, you don't need a crazy collection to make Lockjaw good. You just need small stuff and big stuff, and you need to play your small stuff into Lockjaw and cheat out big stuff. That's possible in, you know, pull 2, pull 3. You don't need crazy series 5 cards to make this one work. And number 3, he embraces that RNG and chaos like many of the other cards on this list as well, because you never know what's going to be in the box. It's fun to crack open the Lockjaw and see what's inside. That's perhaps not the best imagery, but you know what I mean. It's fun to see what you're going to get out of the Lockjaw. So really combine some of the best aspects of Marvel Snap, the most fun stuff condensed all into one card while still remaining accessible to a wide variety of the player base. And of course, that's a recipe for a ton of success. Obviously, people like this dog. Not to mention, he's a good doggo, as people wrote, for being the absolute goodest of boys. Haha, funny doggo. And somebody else wrote, he's a dog and he fetches. That's hilarious. And yeah. Oh, I like this comment too. When you can't legally gamble, you gamble with dog. It's perfect, right? Everybody loves the doggo here, and in fact loves him so much that it's the #1 most loved card in the entire game. And there you have it, folks. The 10 most loved Marvel Snap cards. Pretty cool list here. Yeah, I think it's very interesting that not many cards here crossed over between the most hated and most loved lists. Sometimes you'll see that in games where people love powerful cards and they also hate powerful cards. Marvel Snap, it felt like a lot of the powerful cards escaped people's hatred, and it was more of the like disruptive or agency denying cards that got all of the hate, whereas a lot of the power cards and deck build around cards just got the love side of the equation, which is actually kind of cool. We don't always see that. So neat that these cards are scratching an itch without, you know, irritating too many people. And yeah, I think I love pretty much all of these cards as well. I don't know that my list would look too awful different. Maybe I wouldn't have Cerebro and Lockjaw quite so high on the list, but yeah, both cards that are awesome, and certainly have to say I love them as well. So share your thoughts on all of these cards and more down in the comments below. Did Black Panther deserve to be on the list? I think maybe. Black Panther's pretty sick. But I want to read those comments. Thanks so much as always for watching, and until next time, game on.